Okay, this is the first place I'm sharing about what I've been quietly working on. It's called the Mental Fitness Blueprint. It's a 90-day, deeply personal map for training your mind to work for you, not against you. And I'm opening this up to just 50 founding members. So if this podcast has ever helped you slow down or see yourself more clearly, this is your invitation. Details are in the show notes or at mchampagne.com. This is going to be a little bit of, I shouldn't say different, it's just we're in a different environment because most of the Behind the Human episodes are virtual. So this is nice to be in person. We're in Collingwood, Ontario, here with Patricia, and also a bit of a co-host, I guess you can say, Valentin, who stay tuned in the coming months. We've got a project we've been working on, a book project, but it felt appropriate since Patricia's novels are often set in France to bring a person from France who lives in Canada to assist and ask some questions. Val, welcome to the show as well.
Thank you, Mike.
And Patricia, this may be a bit of a different interview for you because I know you just doing the research for this. I know you typically, most of the interviews are around, of course, your books and kind of the story and so forth, which we will, I'm sure, touch on that. But as the title of the show alludes to, here we go behind the human to understand who is the person creating these works of art and how do you live and how do you think and so forth. So with that, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be here talking to you and to meet you, Valentin.
Yes. And thank you, by the way. I should let everyone know I'm grateful you said yes because I was the eavesdropper down below here where we're sitting in a coffee shop where I was working probably on my book. And you can tell when people are talking about book launches and things, just like subtle words were popping up and you were right behind me. And I felt compelled to introduce myself and see if we can have a chat. So here we are. So thank you for saying yes. Who are you?
I don't know how deeply you want to get into
Deep
this.
as you want to go.
I'm a daughter, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a friend. Those are my most important roles in life. And then after that would come author because it's something I never anticipated. I didn't know that's what I was. And sometimes I think, am I really? But with 13 books, I guess I am. And it's something that came into my life at such a late stage. My first book was published when I was 65.
It's incredible.
And my 13th just came out last month.
Yeah. A French effect. Would you know, or maybe it was a book or a certain period, but when did you feel like that shift happened for you where you're like, oh, I am a writer or I am an author?
The first time it happened was when I opened the box with the first print copies of The Bridge Club, which was my first book.
Yeah.
And we often see on social media authors opening their box. It's become a thing. I don't do it anymore. But yes, that was the first moment. And honestly, as I said to you earlier, every time I physically hold one of my books, it's a thrill.
Yeah. So how did it begin? 65, first book. Hey, was it a scenario? Has it been a scenario where you've always had a book about wanting to ooze out? Give us a little context here.
Yeah, like never.
Okay.
But one thing that became apparent to me as time went on with my writing is that I have told stories all my life through photography.
Mm,
I was given my first Brownie camera, a Kodak Brownie camera, when I was 7.
okay.
And I actually have a wonderful black and white photo with the fringed edges,
Yeah.
like the old photographs, that my mom or my dad took of me taking a picture with my camera when I was 7. And I was so thrilled to discover that I still had that picture. And so that began me clicking shutters. And obviously, it appealed to me in some way. And then when I was first married, my husband was with Kodak.
Oh.
And so as he became more senior in the company, we got free developing,
Sure.
free film. It was very exciting. And I could take courses at Kodak, and we just lived 10 minutes from the main head office in Toronto. And so that was just made photography even more a part of our lives. And Kodak was an amazing company at that time for its employees. And
Yeah.
my husband ended up becoming vice president and
Okay.
was about to become president, the youngest president of Kodak Canada, when he suddenly passed away at age 49. But I continued taking pictures,
Yeah.
and I treasure the pictures I have with him, of course. And as I began writing, I thought, yes, I have been telling stories. Just ask my kids, who
Yeah.
grew up with a camera pointed at them all the time. And of course, traveling, I was always taking photos
Yeah.
and making photo books. And I began to feel, and still do feel very strongly, that storytelling was always a part of my life. I just didn't realize it. And then when I was in my early 60s, I had remarried, and my husband had some, excuse me, some health issues. And I had days where I had more time on my hands.
Okay.
And I have a wonderful group of women in my life who, since I was 18, and we've always called ourselves the Bridge Club. Though the way we started playing bridge was because we partied so much on Saturday nights. We'd, we'd be very hungover the next day, and we'd get together and play bridge. And most of us were single at that time. And this friendship and the bridge playing continued
Yeah.
throughout, even to this day.
Okay.
And so I I said to my friends, maybe I should write that book, The Bridge Club. And they'd always said, somebody should write a book about us, because we always found ourselves very amusing. But then one of us would also point out that probably no one else would find us
Yeah.
as amusing as we did.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's what started it. And it evolved into a different type of story, in that there is no central plot that weaves its way through. It's more like 8 short stories about 8 different women
Mm.
and something that happened in their life at different stages. So it takes the women from their early 20s through to their 70s in that book. And I realized then, when I got to the end of the 8 chapters, that something had to happen, because who wants to read this book about these 8 women for no particular reason? So there was a major crisis
Okay.
that they faced. And then you realized why you needed to know these women and their values and their way of thinking and their approach to life, so that they could deal with this, which really was an end of life decision that one of the women was making. And of course, this was 15, would have been almost 20 years ago that I was writing it. And dying with dignity was just becoming something that was talked about more openly. And I had known a friend up here in Collingwood, actually, who had not died with dignity. She had frontal lobe dementia and lived for 7 or 8 years with that, in the most horrible, undignified way, with good care. And she had no idea what was happening to her. But every time I went to visit her, I would leave thinking how horrified she would be to know that this was how her life had ended,
Yeah.
and that no one deserves to have to die like that. And especially today, because we have options and you can die with dignity. I know it's a difficult topic for a lot of people to talk about, but it's something that's really important to me. And now with the MAID program in Ontario, that's
Mm.
something that has come a long way. But anyway, so that's how that book started.
Was it hard to get started when you made the decision, or what was that like?
Yes, that's a good question. It's nice to have to go back and think about that for a minute. And yes, and as I was writing it, in no way was I thinking this was going to be a book that would be published. I was just writing it for my little group, for the Bridge Club. And they were all really into helping me remember, because some of the things I was writing about had happened like 30 years prior to, say, this one person. So we had to spend some time talking to each other. We'd lived it together, but she would remember the details. It was her story. And so she had to share those details with me. And they all were fully on board. They really wanted to do it, thought it was cool.
Yeah.
And again, we were just like doing it for ourselves. But when I got to the point where the crisis occurred, then they were all shocked because they didn't that it wasn't really a part of what happened in real life with us. It happened to someone else that I knew.
Yeah.
And so I've had to pose the question to them as if it had happened within our group and how would they have reacted?
It's
As
fun.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, it was really
Yeah.
interesting. And so then they started saying, I was telling a friend about what you're doing. And as I finished a chapter, I'd send it to them to read and give me feedback. And so some of them said, well, I've shown a few chapters to some of my friends. And I'm going, oh my God. And people are saying to me, "Why isn't she publishing that book?" Because she's telling women's stories, and it's a great book club book that there's so much to talk about. And as I was writing, I was also taking courses, writing courses, going to writing workshops all along because as I was writing, I had questions myself about
Yeah.
the craft and reading about a POV. What is a POV? Somebody's point of view, and you can't mix other point of views in when you're talking about this person's point of view. And so there was a lot of learning
Mm.
that I was doing too. But again, just to help myself.
Yeah, as you were going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was no end particular end in sight for this
Yeah.
book. It was just to do a good job for us.
About that.
Beautiful.
Val, anything on your mind right now?
Yeah, it's really interesting hearing you talk about your personal story and how it really bridged into the novel, and even reading The French Effects, your latest book, and there's parallels in your life story, what you just shared with Nora, the main character. Something I'm interested in hearing about is how much overlap is there typically, whether in this last book or in previous books, between the main character and your own personal life story, both at the high level, like life story, but also deeper down from an emotional perspective, what they're going through. I'm curious to know how much of it is you versus in this fictional character.
In the Bridge Club, definitely there was a chapter that was my story. And I changed the names in the book, except for one name, or she wanted me to leave it. And she was like a main character. I say was because sadly, we lost her 3 years ago. But she was larger than life. And she thought it was really funny that I left her name in it. She lived in Oakville, a very well known family. And she'd call me sometimes and say, guess what? I just met somebody at blah, blah. And they said, I just finished reading a book about a group of women and I think you're in it. And she very proudly would say, yes, I'm the recovering alcoholic, which she was her whole life. So in that book, one of the chapters is about a woman whose husband dies when she's 43 and she has two sons. And that chapter is my story. It is, I wanted to write about that experience. That was the most impactful experience of my life was and is. And it's something that affected me and still does to this day. It never leaves you. What happened with writing, as far as these characters reflecting my life, the fact that I was widowed when I was 43 and had to deal with grief, which was something that is the strongest emotion you can have, it's allowed me to write about women who are facing sort of similar things. You will have noticed Nora is a widow. In drawing lessons, Ariana's husband has frontal lobe dementia and is in assisted living and doesn't know her or anything anymore. And she has to deal with that. How is she going to go on with her life? And yeah, so that having had that major loss in my life at 43 definitely finds its way into a lot of my stories. But yeah, I don't feel that my stories are sad. And they don't all contain people who've had that kind of loss. In The Promise of Provence, Catherine, the protagonist, is dealing with a divorce, not a death.
Sure.
But in many ways, there are similarities too, because it's loss and grief and all that. But of course, she finds her way to France.
There we go.
And that was after I wrote The Bridge Club, after it was published, and I started hearing from readers, because this is the beauty of social media, and the readers would say, we loved reading about older women. We liked the fact that I could read about a woman in my 50s or my 60s. And so I thought, okay. And then say, what else have you written? And I'd have to say, as a matter of fact, nothing. But I'm working on something. Because by the time the book was printed and I started hearing from readers, I had also become very involved with the writing community online. I'd taken a blogging course because that was a big thing in those days. Now, not so much. Everybody's into Substack. But in those days, it was blogging. And it's so much fun because there were, I think, 40 of us taking that course. And the woman who was giving it, it was a 1-month course, and we all bonded. And at the end of the month, she said, I'm having so much fun with this course, and I love what you're all doing. Let's do it for another month, no charge. And so that's what happened. So even today, a lot of those authors, we see each other on social media, are still in touch. And that was my first sort of introduction to the beauty and the collegiality of the writing community. It's incredible. And every author that I know is so supportive, so enthusiastic about what you're doing, as well as what they're doing. And it's just, I feel so blessed to have this in my life.
Beautiful.
But I'm getting away from your question about how much of me is in each one of those protagonists. And there's a little bit of me in everything, I guess. My friends who read the book say, "Oh,
Yeah.
we know that was you."
Yeah.
But some things that happened in my stories didn't happen to me, and some things did. And it's just, you take what's happening in your life, if you're writing fiction, and you use that as you're writing your story. Even you might be writing a murder mystery, but somewhere in there'll be some little nuggets of something that comes out of your head.
It's 'cause it's what you know.
That's right.
And you
Yeah.
describe that in detail.
And sometimes it may be a conscious decision.
Yeah.
I'm going to add this trait of this character or the
Right.
life event. And I'm assuming sometimes it's also unconscious. It just happens. And
That's
you're like,
right.
oh, wait a second. Actually, Nora
Uh-huh.
is like me on this matter. I haven't really planned for that. Does that
Right.
happen?
Yes, yes, I would say that. Yeah.
Perfect. Do you feel like you learn about yourself through the characters?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
Every time you write a book, and I would love to hear what my other author friends say, but I think they would agree. Yeah, when you write a novel, you have an experience, even if it has absolutely nothing to do with your real life. And again, I think of the women that are, and men who are writing murder mysteries. I know they're not going around killing people.
You hope so.
As fiction.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And all this romantasy now. And I have a friend who writes about zombie cowboys and sells a bazillion books. But I don't think she actually knows any, but in her head, she sure does.
Sure.
Yeah, she lives in Barrie, actually.
Okay, really?
Mm.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And that she might be a very interesting
Okay.
interview.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
kidding.
So, yeah, it's having the opportunity to write books or write whatever it is you want to write. Maybe it's articles or poems or whatever. It's such a gift. It really is. And I really believe, having met so many people and talked with people who say, I want to write something. I feel like writing something. And I always recommend Stephen King's book on writing, A Memoir of the Craft. I read many books on the craft of writing, and many were recommended, but that book was recommended in every single course or class I took. And he published that, I think, about 13 years ago now. And there have been some new additions through the years. And it was so funny because the first part of it is his life story to a certain point. I think up to the accident, if I remember correctly. And he was not just your regular guy. He had a pretty quirky upbringing, and you realize when you get to the end of that part that you have some understanding of his writing style. And I don't know how most people think, and I would think they felt this like, I really liked him, but the time I got to the end of that, I thought, it would be so cool to just sit down with him
Yeah.
and have a drink or have a talk. And so then he says, "Okay, now I finished this part, but what my publisher wanted me to do was to write a book telling people how to write." And he said, "Never would I even consider
Yeah.
doing that. How can you? Because writing is so individual. Everyone has to have their own approach." He said, "All I can do is tell you what works for me or what doesn't work for me and use it. Whatever is going
Mm.
to help you, please be my guest."
Yeah.
And then he talks about all sorts of things, and it's just a wonderful book. The most important message for me at that point, because I hadn't published The Bridge Club yet, I was just still writing it. He said, "If you feel so strongly that you have a story to tell, sit down and write it. And don't worry about grammar or spelling or whether it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. Just get that story
Yeah.
out. And then, the real work begins. You may reread it yourself and work on it. The next thing you have to do is find an editor and not your cousin or your mother's best friend. You have to find a professional editor. Certainly, you can show it to your friends and have them read it and give you feedback. But seriously, for editing, you must have a proper editor. And I know some people, even today, who are reluctant to do that. I don't want to spend $5,000. I haven't got $5,000 to spend on an editor. Editing services that you can find that
Sure.
aren't as expensive, but generally speaking, an editor that comes highly recommended is probably going to cost you about that much. If you've written a book that's going to be, say, 90,000 words or 110,000 words, somewhere in there, and they have every editor will send you a breakdown of how much they charge per word, and it's worth it.
Yeah, yeah. But I think it's any creative project or it's easy to get stuck in your own head and you have blinders on, obviously, because you're in the story or you're in the project, whether that's a corporate thing, it doesn't matter, right? But
Sure.
just getting that feedback. So loosely tied to that, I want to come back to what you mentioned around community, because I think there's a lot of people that are listening that they may not be writers, but they're working on different creative projects and so forth. And I'm curious to know, you're 13 books in. I'm assuming they're not always just super smooth, like, yeah, here's the perfect picture and everything is from start to finish. So for you, what have been some of the bigger challenges and maybe even take this latest book, The French Effect, and how has like the writing community or your tribe helped you through any of those moments?
Certainly, I am friends with a lot of writers. I am into groups of writers, a small group, the Blue Sky Book Chat. There are just 9 of us, and we are interacting with each other every week, posting on our group page in Facebook, helping each other promote our work, and we have a new monthly newsletter. We have another author who was actually part of the group, but is not a part of the author part of the group, but she manages us.
Okay.
She makes stuff happen because it wouldn't get happening without her. And she's writing her own books. So she has an author assistance program that's wonderful. It's called the Author Genie. Just give her a little plug there. Carrie Schaefer, and she's amazing. And she's a huge help with all sorts of things. What she helps me with mostly is technical stuff, like getting my newsletter formatted properly, because we did use MailChimp, I think, and I could put everything in there. Of course, I put a lot of photos in my newsletters because it's my thing, right? And then we switched to something else. I won't say the name of it. And because my number of subscribers was growing and it was getting expensive, so we switched to this other format, I guess you would call it. And I cannot for the life of me put my photos in properly. I messed the whole thing up.
Yeah.
So now I write my newsletter, I send it to Carrie, I attach the photos, and she puts it all together and sends it out. So that's something that's a huge help
Okay.
to me. I feel like I'm just not a very good technical person.
Sure.
And even though that's pretty basic.
What about the writing itself, though?
Yeah. So the writing itself, we'll talk to each other, might be stuck with an idea, or you can say, "What do you think of this? I think this is going to happen, but does it make sense?"
Mm,
And yeah, so there's a lot of sharing of how to do things craft wise.
okay.
There's a lot of just listening and say, "No, yeah, it sounds great. Keep going." Or, "Yeah, I agree. You got a problem there. Let's think about it some more."
Yeah.
And I also have a very part of this online writing community becomes your beta readers, your advanced readers. So one of my very best friends, we rented an apartment in Toronto when we were 20, and we've been friends ever since, and shared a lot of things throughout our lives. When I started writing, I knew that Gail was going to be my angel
Mm,
because she's the most voracious reader I know.
okay.
She reads and so many books, it's doesn't make sense. And she talks about them, and she I keep telling her she would be a really good editor, and she doesn't miss anything as far as grammar goes or punctuation. And so she reads absolutely everything I write from day one. And I might just have the idea, but haven't got it going anywhere yet. And I'll send it off to her and she'll read it. So by the time I just sent her print copy of that
Okay.
this week, and I said, like every book I've written, it wouldn't have happened without you, because she reads it just as a reader, not as a professional editor, but
Mm,
she finds things, and she'll say, I'll say, "Okay, so what do you think? Does that make sense? Does that make this person likable or not likable? Or
yeah.
would you believe that if it happened?" And she can answer all
Important.
those questions. That's so
Mhm.
important, yeah. And you two working together now
Yeah.
will find yourselves doing that with each other. And yes, you need to be talking about your work with someone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something you just said made me wonder. I wonder how much of your process today is led by, and maybe it's not binary as much, but led by sort of your intuition, something that comes from deep down, or versus the left brain, more analytical, calculating mind. Stuff, does this make sense or not? Like, do I make this go in this direction? Or the flip side, just letting the words come out unguided, undirected.
Most of the time, it's pretty undirected.
Yeah.
I would say it's just blah, 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 blah. And, and then you go back, and I don't think that I'm self editing, but maybe I am, because I reread everything all the time as I'm going along. I'm a chronological writer. I start at the beginning of my story and I go straight through, like with things happening here in this part of the story. That's what I'm working on. I know some writers will work on the ending
Yeah.
and then go back and do other things. And I find all that really fascinating. I love to hearing the processes of other writers, but what has just organically worked for me is to start the story and get going and see what happens as you go along. And I have a lot of surprises when I'm writing my stories, and
And that you're smiling for people that can't see this, but that excites you, obviously. That sounds so
yeah,
fun,
it is fun.
right?
It is.
Yeah.
And writing fiction, I think, particularly is fun. When you're writing historical fiction, which I have not done, although there is a historical fiction segment to this story, in that Nora meets a woman in her 90s who's Giselle's aunt. And Giselle says, "My aunt, Marie Louise, was a child in Paris during the occupation. And she did things, she helped with the resistance, as children did in those days, carrying messages hidden in the most creative manners, stitched into part of their clothing, or into the heel of a shoe, or inside a loaf of bread."
Mm,
And so that I realized that if I wanted to add that to my story, I was in fact becoming a writer of historical fiction for just that one personality, and I didn't know how it would fit, how I could work it in to the rest of the story, and I wanted it to be good. I wanted it to be true, and at first, I thought maybe I'm gonna have to take that out because it's perhaps not gonna blend with what else is happening in the story, but somehow it all worked out,
Right.
and that was my first question. Oh, I'll tell you one thing that I did differently with this book is I hired a book coach.
Oh,
Book
okay.
coach. Sounded like I said a book coach, didn't it? But I hired a book coach, and I did this through the advice of a good friend of mine, Camille Pagan, who's a very successful writer. And I met her through Lake Union Publishing when they signed me to a contract for some of my books. And we've remained friends. And she's a very successful coach as well as a writer. But I love her writing style, and I sort of feel I write a little bit like she does. I'm not as funny as she can be. But anyway, so I signed on for some coaching sessions with her. And I should just back up and tell you why I did this. Okay, this is getting personal. You can edit things out what you want, right?
No, I
Yeah.
mean, this is, yeah.
Okay, so last July, you already know this, but just to explain how it happened. Last July, I turned 80. And my age had never bothered me before. 50, 60, 70, no problem. Life was good. Life went on. Nothing really changed. But then all of a sudden, I don't know, this number 80 just messed with my head. I was like, oh my God, I'm so old. I'm going to die tomorrow for sure. And that, which is so ridiculous because I already know people die at 49, like my husband. Whenever the age has nothing to do with your future or anything else is just a number. But anyway, I really let it bother me. And I thought, oh no, I might not write anymore because I'm so old. Yeah. Then in January, I received an invitation to become part of a writing group online, the Tall Poppy Writers, which it was formed 10 years ago by a well-known American novelist called Anne Garvin. And I remember being very aware of that group. It was when these author reader groups were starting on Facebook. And I just really liked the sound of this one. And I always thought it would be very cool to be part of it. But I knew you had to be invited. So anyway, all of a sudden, I was invited. And it was, for me, it was a very big deal. I was very excited. I was very honored that they felt I was up to being part of their group.
And what you needed in that moment.
And yeah, really, it
Yeah.
was. And I acknowledge the group and Garvin in the acknowledgments at the back of the book because it just really made me think, oh, okay, maybe I will write another book. And if I'm going to, okay, that was January. All right, if I'm going to, I want to have it out before the end of this year. And that would be the quickest that I've ever written a full novel.
Okay.
I've written no, not two, I've written 6 shorter novels. And that doesn't take me as long. But for a full novel, I would say a year and a half would be what I would need. And for the Bridge Club, of course, it was several years because there were a lot of times along the way when I wasn't writing much. So anyway, I thought, okay, I'm going to hire Camille and do some sessions with her about just getting into this and figuring out what the synopsis, telling her what I thought the story was going to be. And so how does it sound to you? How will the synopsis evolve? And she was very instrumental in helping me do the back.
The book back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I may, there's just one thing that I feel really compelled to mention because of the potted story with Giselle's aunts in this. Like Mark mentioned, I'm a Frenchman. My
Yeah.
grandmother, who I've already mentioned to you
Yes.
before, was about 18 years old during Nazi occupation, living in Paris, and was a typewriter and actually carried messages for the resistance
Ah.
in her bra.
Ah.
The amount of coincidences and parallels with the story that
Yes.
you're telling in this book with 2000 is just really mind blowing. So I had to share.
That
It-
is amazing. And yes, that really going back to Marie Louise's story, I didn't find out a lot of information about children during the occupation in Paris. I was Googling everything and looking all over. I couldn't find anything that really gave me much information, and I was shocked. And I'm even wondering if maybe I should look into that and write a historical fiction about that time period. And I'm just thinking about it because once you finish a novel, I was going to say something that isn't really true. Once I finish a novel, I don't know what's coming next.
Yeah.
But I have many writers, especially with traditional publishers who are on deadlines and in their assembly line. When their book is published, they're already writing the next book or even the next two, which always just blows my mind. And I think is why I remained an indie author after my 4 books with Lake Union, because the working to those deadlines just, I didn't think I could do it. You know how I really got started into the historical aspect of that time period with children? Was through ChatGPT.
Okay.
And I almost feel embarrassed saying that because there's so many aspects of AI that I disagree with. But honestly, I could not have written that part of the book
Mhm.
without getting the start.
Yeah.
ChatGPT told me about a particular square in Paris in Le Marais district, which was the old Jewish quarter, and named some streets. And from that, I was able to then research that square and that part of the city, and then find other things and read them and research them and get the truth that I needed and wanted for that aspect of this book. And AI does have a place. You have to use it properly
Yeah.
and not take it as God's truth, and certainly not just use what they say there and publish that, which is a horrible thing to think of, people publishing books that are totally written by AI. But interestingly enough, that's what got me started with her story. And then when I was in Paris, this year, I went to that square and I walked on those streets and got even more feeling about it. Even though the book was basically finished, I could still go in and change things, which I did.
It's incredible. Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, but I think I veered off what you were asking me again.
No, it's perfect. And I'm also conscious, I know we're at time, so I'll maybe ask one last question. But first, I have to say,
Uh-huh.
since we're speaking about age, or you brought age up, I mean, I don't know many 80-year-olds that are talking about, oh, I was in Chat GPT doing this and that. And first of all, you, don't even look or act like any 80-year-old I'd ever met.
And
So
what is 80?
exactly.
Yeah.
And please keep writing books. Don't stop.
I think I will. I think I have to. Oh, I know. I was going to tell you about a book coach, which I think is an important thing to talk about. But there's a woman, I belong to 2 book clubs in Collingwood. One is a group of women who've lived here for a long time, and they've all been friends for about 20 years or so. And one of them is my neighbor in this building. So I was really thrilled when they invited me to join their book club. And then we have our own book club here in the Monaco.
Okay.
And so we meet once a month and
Yeah.
have read a book and talk about it, and that's going really well too. So book clubs are great. And I visit them all the time. And after COVID, of course, that opened the door to visiting book clubs on Zoom, which is amazing. You can be with a book club in Timbuktu, it doesn't matter. It's a wonderful thing that it opens the world, more of the world to your writing. And so I love visiting with book clubs, and there are a lot here. I've been really busy, of course. When you have a new book out, it brings things up. And I volunteer at our local library, and they have a really interesting book club set up where they have a bag with 8 or 10 copies of a specific book,
Hmm.
and then interesting facts about the book and the writer and all that sort of thing. So a book club can just decide to read one of those books and pick up the kit at the library and it's all there for them, which I think is really wonderful. And the book club that I visited a couple of weeks ago said to me at the end of the evening that they don't often have the actual author there talking about the book, and they were so happy to do that, and they wanted to give me something. And I don't want, in the past, whenever someone has said we have a certain amount that we like to give you, I always have it, ask them to donate it to whatever. Yeah. But these ladies said, so what we've decided is they had read The Secrets We Hide.
Okay.
And so they said, we've told the library that we're going to set up a book club kit for that book, and we'll pay for the books and pay to have all that there in the library, which is wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. But okay, I remembered that I was going to tell you about a book coach, which is quite amazing because when I get off on another tangent, who knows where it's going to go. So Camille said to me, have you ever thought about hiring a book coach? Because I was saying to her, okay, here's the problem now. Okay, so I've got the story. I know I know how it's going to start, but I want to have it out by November because I want to hit the holiday market because it isn't necessarily a Christmassy book, but it is set in Paris and Provence in December. And so obviously it's going to be a lot of Christmas stuff. And I don't know, nobody does Christmas better than France. Excuse me, just adjusting my Christmas brooch. And she said, I can recommend some people. And what you do, you hire a book coach who you'll meet with at an agreed interval, say every 2 weeks. You'll send her what you've written, and she's not going to edit, but she's going to read it and think about it and give you her feedback.
It's like a developmental editor kind of stuff, right?
You know, that's a great idea. It's working. And so one of my first questions was when I got to the part where Marie Louise came into the story was, is this working? Is it too much of a jolt? Like the story's going along and this is happening and life is interesting, but in a very different way. And then all of a sudden, here is this very serious story that becomes part of the whole concept. And does it work? Or is it too much of a shock to go from not talking about that in one chapter to talking about it in the next chapter? Because it had to go along. Nora had to meet with her on a schedule and talk with her and hear what she had to say. And sometimes it was very emotional for her to go back and think about those days and think about what happened and think about what was happening in the country. And yeah, it was really serious and thought-provoking, I hope, for the readers that it is. And yet at the same time, it was just also part of what is the character of French people. And sitting across the table from a French person, and started thinking, boy, that's like, how do you say that? But I also mentioned at the end of the book, a book that I read. In fact, I'll be happy to lend it to you if you like. It's by an American writer who was the bureau chief for one of the big American newspapers for 30 years in Paris. And she's written several books about different parts of Paris and that. And I acknowledge her at the back of my book too, because when I first started writing the Provence stories, I knew that I wanted to understand more about the character of the French people, of the culture. Like, why are the French people like this? And it's very distinctive. I don't know whether, I'm sure there must be other books written about German people and Italian and that sort of thing, because we are all so different. And so one thing that came very clear to me throughout the book was referring to everything, whether it's language or food or art or architecture, every aspect of French life that you can think of. It's based on seduction and pleasure. And seduction and pleasure to a North American might sound like kind of raunchy, but it's not because the French go back so far. Your history goes back centuries and centuries before North American history ever started to develop. But I love that book, and I'd be interested in hearing your opinion of it
I'd love to hear.
after you read it because I think she nailed it. And just certainly from what I experience whenever I'm over there, how I feel about France and the culture. Her book gave me a lot of understanding about that. And one of the characters, and not just one of the characters, all the French characters in the book have something to teach Nora about why they are the way they are, why life is the way it is. It's, I don't know.
Incredible.
I'm in love with France. What can I say? It's just blatant. And I'm so sad that my husband isn't able to travel anymore because we always thought that we would actually buy a place and live over there eventually, but it just happened when I remarried. I was 50 and he had my two sons were just starting university. Oops. Oh God. What time is it? Oh geez. Okay. I have to go home and put my ugly Christmas sweater on
Ooh,
and join 12 other ladies for lunch and then a cookie exchange.
well, that sounds fun.
You believe
Sounds
that?
fun.
How small town is that,
I
right?
love it.
Yeah, so I first went to France when I was 21, backpacking after university, and that's when the love affair started. I was in Antibes. We finally made our way down, traveling with some girlfriends. And by that point, it was just one other girlfriend and myself, and she's from the Bridge Club and still very much alive. And she's come over to France since when I've been there too. And when my husband and I've been there and stayed with us. But so she and I, we were running out of money. So we were traveling by Eurail passes, right? And we get on one place at night and sleep on the train and then figure out where we were getting off the next morning. So we get off and by the time I'm thinking about now, it was summertime. So it was always somewhere on the beach. And so we ended up in Antibes, and we were on the beach which is Antibes. The town of Antibes is actually two towns joined together. And we met these two guys from Belgium. You don't have to put this in your podcast. I'm just telling you this because I think it's funny. And it's part of what started this whole lifelong love affair. So we met these two Belgian guys on the beach. They couldn't speak English, but my French is passable. I'm like, if you started speaking French to me now and wanted me to speak French back to you, I'd be so embarrassed. But I've taught French. I taught French immersion in grade 1, 2, and 3. Vous. But anyway, so we met these two guys and we're on the beach with them having a good time and they're broken French, broken English. And so we said we'd go for dinner somewhere. So we picked up our stuff, went for dinner, and then they said Jean has a real party town. And so they said, there's a train at 10, so we can go from dinner. We can go to the disco for an hour or so, and then we'll drive you over to the train station while we miss the train. But if you know what the trains are like on the coast, it's wonderful. Like you can go to the coast of France and you don't need a car because you can take the train from all along to one wonderful town after another, all the way from the Italian border to Cannes and then beyond into past the Côte d'Azur. So anyway, we're driving along and the train's going. We're driving, trying to catch up with the train, and anyway. I don't know whether they hit the brakes too often or whatever, but we missed it at the next station too. Anyway, to make a long story short, we ended up camping with them for a week in Antibes, and they had this little white sports car, and we drove everywhere up into the hills, and it's so beautiful. And it was like just amazing. And this little white sports car used to backfire all the time. And every time it backfired,
It's like a regular movie.
I was laughing. Oh, God, yeah.
Oh,
And it just was, if that hadn't happened, probably my life would have been very different. But after that, I was lucky with my husband with Kodak. He had to go to France on business quite often, so I always went with him. And then when I remarried, my husband had gone to medical school in Vienna. He's actually from Syria, but he had gone to medical school in Vienna and done his residency in Germany and then come to Canada. So he loved being back in Europe. The European way of life was really important to him. So
Mm,
that's why we kept going back every year. And we would go to Vienna, but then we also went to the south of France, and that he loved it too. So
amazing. For everyone listening, you can all get your taste of France through your eyes, of course, with frankly all of your books. But I highly encourage everyone pick up The French Effect and dive in. And Patricia and Val, thank you for both of your time and for being here. And I guess just to put a bow on this, my final question, if you had to give yourself like a one-line message to keep writing books for many years, what would that be today? What do you need to hear?
what I need to hear is something that I hear from readers, and I feel so fortunate. This to me is the best reward of writing, is just when I go on social media or in my emails, and there'll be a note from somebody. I just finished your book. I loved it. I'm dying to go back to France. That's what keeps me going for sure. Yeah.
Amazing.
And I haven't mentioned that, like, for 10 years, I led a women's tour in France, a 12-day tour for 16 to 18 women based on my books. We'd do 6 days in Nice and then 6 days in Arles, which is where drawing lessons is set. And then we do day trips every day because I said I will not do a tour where we're in and out of hotels every 2 days. I'm not going to do that. So honestly, it was suggested to me by a travel agent and then it just evolved. But for 10 years, I did that, and it was such a joy. And the last one that I did was 2 years ago, and 6 women from this building went on the tour, and 3 others in town, the 3 other women I play tennis with. That tour just lives on. Everybody, every year, and it was always different women, many traveling on their own. They all fell in love with France.
For what it's worth,
Well,
even for me, a French person, reading The French Effect, you're making me want to rediscover France.
There's the ultimate call to
that
land.
is, yes. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to chat with you. It really was. Anytime.